And then they get into weight and balance. Now, this weight and balance is the shortest thing ever because, as we said before, if you respect the limits, it's all good. They do have a little bit about the lateral CG. So again, if you're just flying by yourself, you might want to throw some ballast in the other seat just to make your life better. Then they go into section 7, system descriptions. And if you go through this section, they're going to talk about all the different systems, like what are the doors made out of? How do they work? You know, what kind of a fuel system does it have? Where's the drain for it? What about the pre-rotator? What kind of an engine does it have? What sort of rotor system does it have? What does it do for vibration dampening? What are the flight controls? How do they work? What's on the stick? Here are the pedals. How do I adjust them? It shows me all of that. Trim tab. Again, this is important. I don't know how many times I've had people come up to an airplane usually and they see a trim tab on the rudder and they decide to bend it straight. And if you think about it, if it was straight, it has no point in being there. It's there to relieve pressures at various airspeeds. By the way, one thing I will say about a gyroplane, if you're used to flying, say, an airplane or a helicopter even, that might surprise you, is that the amount of pressure required to have a lot of deflection in the rudders in a gyro tends to be a lot higher than you would think because the rudder is right behind the propeller and it's just blasting that air directly on that surface. So don't be surprised if your instructor says, hey, put in some more right rudder, and you're like, I got all that I can do. And the control will actually move farther. You just think that you're there because the pressure is very high. And they describe the throttle and the brake panel and all of that. So they're going to be very explicit in describing things. They talk about the different avionics that might be installed, different instrument panel options. You might have things like G3X touches here. You might have a more traditional panel. This one has gyros. You might have an iPad mount. There's a lot of different options. You know, if you're getting it from the factory, they're going to have a set of options they normally like. And of course, if you build it yourself, you can do whatever you want. Here's a glass cockpit display. There's a dual glass display. Here's a G3X touch. And then they talk about what's the cabin air. You pull this little knob. How does that work? And then they get into handling and maintenance. How do I move this thing around? Who can do maintenance on it? What are the inspections that are required? How do I clean it? How do I refuel it? They have this stick that comes with the machine that will tell you how much fuel's in it. This end is used, the very bottom, for measuring your coolant as well. How do you check the oil level, the tires? How do you lubricate this thing? By the way, it uses this grease on the rotor head that you pretty much will not find anywhere, at least in the US. So pretty much you're going to buy that from Autogyro US, or you're going to have to buy it from somebody in Europe. How do you replenish the fluids? How do you keep the battery charged? It has a small battery, and there's no easy way to jump start an Autogyro, by the way. So you want to keep that battery up. How do you disassemble the rotor system? How do you assemble it again? And then we have our supplements. What if I have the different rotor system, for example? What if I have the variable pitch propeller? All of that is here. Oh, by the way, this is an option where you can get an instructor throttle. So your instructor can use their right hand on the cyclic too. I've talked to a couple people about that, and it seems like people would rather just use their other hand because it's hard to crawl over that throttle. Or at least that's what I've been told. And the safety tips, things like no low Gs. Don't do big side slips. Make sure you have fuel. Don't push the envelope. You know, don't walk into your prop. Look out for power lines. Make sure you have visibility. Don't be overconfident. Don't fly right over the water. And be careful if you're converting from a different machine. You don't want your old habits to come and bite you, basically. Be careful when you're doing demonstration, initial training flights. Yep. As a helicopter instructor, I can tell you this. People say, hey, what's the difference between a helicopter instructor and an airplane instructor? And the biggest difference is how quickly your students can kill you. It's a lot quicker in a rotorcraft. I would say the helicopter is probably a little bit worse than the gyro, but remember that the gyro is a weird machine where the takeoff is probably one of the harder things to do, and the landings are actually kind of easy. If you're landing off field, be careful about that. Okay, so that's pretty much your gyro plane flight manual. At least, you know, it's a very quick overview of the manual for the Cavalon. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we're going to move on to some standard flight operations that you would have in a gyroplane. So we'll see you then.